Hey, you're listening to Tech Policy Grind, a podcast from the Internet Law and Policy Foundry. My name is Emory Roane, and today it's another foray into privacy, or more specifically, the International Association of Privacy Professionals. This time with Angelique Carson, editor of the Privacy Advisor and host of the excellent and far more popular Privacy Advisor podcast over at the IAPP. If you're not already subscribed to her show, you'll definitely want to check it out. And if you're joining us from the Privacy Advisor, welcome. On our show, we also dive into the legal weedsy, often but not exclusively privacy issues at the forefront of tech policy, with a focus on the early career professionals paving the way in the field. Today with Joe Jerome, we talk about the latest trends in privacy, Angelique's near decade with the IAPP, and work on the Privacy Advisor, and trade stories of podcasting ups, downs, and pro tips. If you enjoy this episode as much as we enjoyed making it, let us know at Tech Policy Grind on Twitter, and maybe tell a friend. And most importantly, if you're a student interested in or an early career professional already working in tech policy and you haven't applied for the next class of fellows at the Internet Law and Policy Foundry, what are you waiting for? Run, don't walk to your nearest internet device. It's actually probably in your hand or nearby, and then immediately go to ilpfoundry.us/join. We're accepting applications now until April 30th, and we want to see yours. I've had an awesome time with the Foundry and have met some amazing colleagues. Highly recommend, 10 out of 10. Okay, the preliminaries are out of the way. Let's get right into it. I'll see you in about 35 minutes, but until then, enjoy this chat with the Privacy Advisor's very own Angelique Carson.
Awesome. All right, so we've got Angelique here, editor of the Privacy Advisor for the International Association of Privacy Professionals. So she also hosts the Privacy Advisor podcast. So I don't know if this is necessarily going to count as a crossover event, but it is nice to finally put someone on the spot and have her join something I'm running for a change. But Angelique, as the Privacy Advisor, my longstanding question to you is, what are you advising people about?
Okay, well, first of all, I am not the Privacy Advisor. I am very much not the Privacy Advisor. But we put out the Privacy Advisor, which is, it comprises stories written by some of our members on the pressing sort of legal issues mostly that they're seeing. And some of the stories are written by myself or other writers at the IPP and focus on, some newsy events like if, the GDPR gets passed or CCPA gets passed, or there's some type of legal entanglement people can't seem to get past to pass some law in the US or abroad. That's the type of stuff that we tackle. So
what's going on right now?
So it looks like there's been a little bit of progress on e-privacy, or at least things are moving a little bit. This is only according to tweets I've been seeing from Eduardo Esteron.
I'm always interested in how much of staying on top of privacy news or even writing about privacy news involves a careful curated Twitter feed.
I hated Twitter for a long time. I hated trying to read the hashtags, and the @ sign messed me up. I was really tech illiterate for a while. But for me, it's been more about growing a profile professionally and at the same time trying to elicit some interest from people who are hopefully following me about the news stories that I'm crafting, and to kind of see me as a legitimate source of news that they need to help them do their jobs better. So I definitely, and I've seen my following. Joe and I joke, we've been racing for followers. He was beating me for a really long time, but I've surpassed him. I think I'm a good 80 followers or so ahead of him right now, which I'm very proud of. Took years. But
now I've got to pull this up and figure this out exactly.
Yeah,
thanks. That wasn't the purpose of this podcast. We don't need to be comparing Twitter followers.
Oh, I think we should.
I think we should, in fact, because Joe, you're sitting at 1,830 compared to Angelique's 1,904 followers. And we're just going to ignore mine.
How are you doing, Emory? How are you doing?
Oh, it's. I think I'm still sub 1,000. I think I'm around 600 or so.
I think you should pull up your number.
596.
Almost at that 600 threshold.
You got to start somewhere.
Well, listeners, you could, anyone listening to this that isn't following me already, at Emory Roane, at Joe Jerome, and...
So Angelique, you're trying to build your brand on Twitter, but also sort of understand the dialogue. What are the mega trends that you're seeing in privacy?
Well, first of all, let's just remember to throw my hand handle in at Privacy Pen. So y'all, if you're going to follow Emory and Joe, please be sure to follow me as well. Shameless plug. I mean, I think right now the biggest thing, and this probably sounds super obvious if you're watching the industry, but we're just seeing this rapid move toward legislation. I think ever since GDPR came down, we started looking at ourselves in the US and thinking, how are we going to stay on par? How are we going to trade data? Etc. And then obviously when CCPA, can we use acronyms here, or should I
Oh,
spell
absolutely.
them out?
Yeah, we've talked about the CCPA enough that if folks don't understand the acronym, we've got like 3 or
Okay.
4 episodes to listen to on it.
Okay, good. So yeah, I think like for me as a journalist working in DC, ever since CCPA happened, my world kind of changed a little bit. Like it seemed like people got freaked out and there was this rapid acceleration of more than just talk, and like yes, we're still just talking, but we're talking with a look toward action. And we're seeing obviously states like Washington and a number, I think there's something like close to 100 state proposals right now on privacy bills. So things have just gotten really, really busy and super interesting to me. Actually, Joe and I were talking the other day about the fact that it took me a really long time to like living in DC because it was just so different from where I come from in the Northeast. But now it's an exciting time to work in privacy because there's all these hearings, and the hearings have really shifted where the dialogue seems more meaningful. The senators and the House representatives seem more educated than they have been in the past. Like they seem like they're coming to the hearings having done some homework, having their staffers have done some research and brief them. They're obviously taking meetings with stakeholders. So it just feels like we're finally getting serious about something, and specifically about a federal baseline bill, so that we're not dealing with all these individual state bills, which depending on which side you sit on this is a good or a bad thing. But yeah, I mean, I
And
think
we've
that's
got
really the
both
biggest.
sides represented on this show, in fact,
Yeah,
actually on the federal side at least. I'm
yeah.
looking at the spreadsheet on my window right now of 30 different California privacy bills that we're analyzing. So,
Oh my God,
yeah.
that's
I
insane.
don't think I don't think anyone has a good number, right? It also depends on how you're defining privacy. Almost all sorts of laws can sort of touch on data flows and data management.
Yeah, very
It's
true.
sort of unmanageable at this point. So, Angelique, I've always Also, I'm sort of curious. How much do you get to craft what you're reporting on? So clearly, you're following these trends. You've got people who want to figure out how they're supposed to comply with CCPA. Pick your acronym. Um, but I can't imagine you like writing about the CCPA ad nauseum. So how do you get to
Mhm.
pick what you write about?
Well, I mean, the cool thing about being where I'm at now in my career is that I've been doing this for 9 years now. I think, yeah, 9 years, going on 10. Which
Congrats.
you say that to anyone in DC and they're like, what? Like, people tend to job hop a lot more than I have, but I'm starting to see some dividends from that. I think in that, for one thing, I have some autonomy in terms of dictating my editorial calendar. Um, but in another way, there's a lot of pressure there because there is so much happening, and it's hard for me to always know, as someone who's not practicing privacy, what is the most interesting and relevant story to our readers. We have an advisory board that I lean on a little bit for that, and then also just having friends like Joe and some of the other kind of lawyery advocacy think tanky friends that I have around town who can kind of tell me what they're really focused and concerned on.
No
But
shortage of
yeah, I
those in
mean,
DC.
yeah, there's no shortage of happy hours to go, gossip over the latest, you know, I hate, X group for introducing this ledge or whatever. Or, this policy.
Way to be positive there.
Yeah, well, I mean, people are passionate in DC, so people aren't usually lukewarm. They stand very firm on one side or the other in general. But
Hmm.
yeah, it does get a little bit frustrating to like write the same stories over and over. Not that we're, but not that we're writing the same things over and over, but there are, like leading up to something getting passed. There's so like I've probably written, I don't know, at least a dozen stories in probably the last 6 months on a federal bill itself. And so you got to try and find the nuance of the hearing. Like, for example, the last hearing that we had in the Senate, they were really focused on location tracking, and they really focused on that in a way that I hadn't seen them focus on it before so heavily. So I think that's what you got to try and do to keep your news relevant and interesting and keep pushing the narrative forward.
Do you feel like this has sort of gone on in circles? So, I mean, you've actually been in privacy land longer than I have. Um, but, Senator Franken was big on geolocation half dozen years ago. the Obama administration was pushing for a privacy bill. Um, like, do you feel like you've gone over these stories before? And as someone who sort of has been doing this for a long time, like how did you start off? Like, what was the first? Do you remember what the trend was in 2010?
Oh my God. Well, the thing is it took me so long to understand, and I'm still learning, data protection and data privacy. Joe knows, like every time I go on a panel, when I'm with practitioners, I get a little nervous because like I'm kind of looking at it from, outside the window, like looking at the people inside who are actually operationalizing it. And so I feel like I'm coming at it from a different perspective. And yes, I talk to a lot of people and become a subject matter expert as quickly as I can so that I can write with some authority. But I think it's harder to get a grasp of the issues when you're not practicing it. But I remember in 2010 when I started, and I was very dumb. I was 25. I was 25 and I was coming from writing just mainstream like community journalism. And I remember we were just writing about breaches all the time, like little breaches though. I remember we call it blurbing. I don't know if that's something other people call things, but we were writing about like, pharmacies that had taken like cardboard boxes filled with sensitive, prescription papers and left it, to be picked up by their garbage removal, and they were found blowing. I remember the phrase blowing in the wind. And like
And I'm going to
that
have
was
to jump in here with a little bit of advocacy here, because the fact that paper records are not included in the definition of personal information on almost any data breach notification statutes, it's a crime. And you can check out our reporting on that at privacyrights.org.
I knew you were going to plug that report. I knew it. I knew it.
Yeah, so I mean that's so first it was just little breaches. And yeah, I feel like there are people who have been focused on geolocation before, and Joe, you could write that book well before I could, but we weren't it I used to just completely like scoff at any mention of a federal bill because I mean, first of all, it's Congress and they don't pass anything. And it just like it was like two
And
steps
now they
forward,
seem like they're really success. I think they've turned over a new leaf. And if there ever was a time to be confident that we're going to see federal privacy legislation, it's with this administration and this Congress in particular.
Emory, you don't sound serious, but you are speaking my talking points right there.
Wait, are you being sarcastic or serious?
Yes.
Oh, okay, that's what I thought. But yeah, no, I know. Joe says, and everyone's, when I ask people, is it going to happen? When's it going to happen? Everyone says yes, it will, but it's not going to happen for 3 years. Is what I'm.
It sounds like you could have said that every day for the past, I don't know, 10 years.
Right, exactly. Well, that's the thing is like I wasn't really writing those stories. Like we would mention it in the Daily Dashboard, which is our newsletter. We would, say, oh, the Washington Post reports, Franken wants to know, like, and he's serious, but like in terms
Can
of
I
it
make a
turning
plug
into
for the Daily Dashboard? Actually, you should probably be plugging all of the IAPP stuff because, like, to the extent people are listening to this and haven't signed up for IAPP materials, a lot of them are free and a pretty good value. So
Actually, I've been trying to figure out a good way to shoehorn in a shift in the conversation, because I do think that we have just sort of skimmed over the International Association of Privacy Professionals.
really rolls off the tongue there.
Yeah, the IAPP, of which you are certified as a SIP-US member. I think that it's probably time to talk a little bit about the organization, yeah, and especially in context of sort of becoming a subject matter expert.
Yeah, so the organization is sort of like this. It's a cool story, really. Our CEO Trevor Hughes was working as a lawyer, and he was starting to see these cases come across his desk that dealt with data breaches and sort of privacy and data protection issues. And he sort of saw the writing on the wall that there was going to need to be someone responsible for data stewardship at companies in a new way. And so, but we have just grown. We've seen this like absolutely exponential growth, especially in Europe, given the GDPR. We've got almost 50,000 members globally right now. And I remember us.
Do you know what member number you are?
I have no idea. But I can tell you that I was like the 30th something higher at the IAPP, and now we've got like 200 people.
Wow.
So that was 9 years ago. So I mean, we used to work in this little. The newbies are tired of us telling this romantic story, but we used to literally work on this creaky old farmhouse in York, Maine, like these beautiful big wide like wood floorboards. Like we used to work in bedrooms together. It was really a small operation. Like you knew everyone's like kids names, not just their names but their kids names. It was like very much a little family. And now we've had to grow as a company, and there's some growing pains that go along with that. We're definitely like, we have this entrepreneurial spirit and we're not for profit, but we're growing into something that's really big. So it's been interesting
What are
to
the
kind of,
different training? What are the different certifications that they offer? I am, full disclosure, I'm a SIP-E, which is certified in European privacy. Joe, are you a member of the IAPP or certified in any?
Obviously, I'm a SIP US.
Obviously, of course.
yeah. So we've got the CIPP US, we've got Europe, we've got Asia, we've got Canada, and we
I think you have a
used to have,
SIP-M, right? Like a
yeah, there's a management
management?
one. Yeah, so that's sort of the less of the what and more of the how, like the sort of practical application of privacy. We've got a CIPP-T, and we used to have a CIPP-G, which was for government folks, but we did away with that.
That's heartbreaking for our listeners who are fans of the Privacy Act.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, we've got all sorts of a grab bag of fun for people who want to get certified. And full disclosure, I studied the best that I could. We've changed the testing process significantly since I got my CIPP. Joe, never call it a SIP. It's like a sin
Oh
at the
no!
IBP.
Oh
Oh,
no!
really? I've
Okay.
only ever referred to it as a SIP, so
Oh
Wow.
no.
excuse me,
Well,
sorry.
Good to
no
know.
problem, man.
Woo.
Between like SIP and IAPP are like the two things that like thou shalt not say. Um, so yeah, when I got mine, which is the US one, it used to be in two modules. You would take what was called foundation, and then you'd take the certification test. So I studied my best. Which is like, we have an incentive at the IBP. If you pass the test, you get a certain financial incentive. So I was like, oh, I'll do this. So I studied a little bit, probably should have studied a little more. And I passed my foundation and I failed my CIPP. So I had to go back and take the second part again. And, but that's the whole thing, is like, I've never practiced before. So it's kind of like you have none of that like on the job, like experience. But, yeah, it was interesting, and I'm glad to be called a CIPP. We're a big old family now. Do you have a designation? You said, Emory?
Yeah, I'm CIPPE,
Okay,
trying
nice,
to get ready for a move over to the EU eventually.
nice, very cool, very cool.
So I guess one thing I've admired about you, and one of the reasons I dragged you on or made you a guest on this show, is you've got your own podcast, and you've managed to keep this podcast going for a couple of years now. I know you always are saying it's part of my job, but I still think it's pretty tough work. So, what was the genius behind creating a Privacy Advisor podcast?
So I have to say that all props go to my former boss, who since left the company. But my boss, Sam Feifel, is pretty media savvy, and he's like very avid podcast listener. He likes to listen to like sports podcasts on his way to work. He used to commute for like an hour and a half each way. So he like became really familiar with podcasting as a medium, and he's like, we should be launching one. And I really didn't want to do it because I didn't listen to podcasts myself. Now I do. I love them, but I didn't listen at the time. So this was probably 3 or 4 years. I can't 3 or 4 years since I've
I
launched.
literally cannot imagine trying to start a podcast if you don't listen to podcasts.
Yeah, that's the thing. And even when I launched it, I don't think I don't even know if I'd listened to one when I launched it. Um, but
So
it was on my
okay, but you listen to you actually listen to yourself, right?
you mean after the fact do I listen?
Yeah.
No, no, I will admit that I have listened to. We got a lot of good feedback on the one that Joe and I did most recently. We did two in a row, and people really responded to it. So I listened to that to kind of try and embed in my head what's working about that one. But in general, I never want to hear myself. Like I probably won't
Yeah,
listen to
yeah.
this one.
Well, all right.
Um,
I mean, just to pull back the curtain here, listeners, because I mean, Angelique and I are both the ones that edit our shows, and
right.
you know, when you edit a podcast and you listen to like that is the there is no more like self-reflective act than having to listen to
Oh,
every single and like
oh,
clearing throat and really dumb thing that you say.
it
So I
is a
listen to our
very
shows like 3 or 4 times while we're editing it, and then never again.
it is a very humbling experience to listen to yourself interview someone, or try and chat intelligently but in a casual way.
Yeah.
And it's also hard because a lot of the time, like, this is fun because I know I've met you, Emery, and I know Joe very well. But when you're talking to someone that you don't have a relationship with at all and you have no idea, especially if you're not face to face, it's really hard to get that like chemistry going and get that nice back and forth. You can't look at their facial expressions and understand, when you're asking a question if you're headed in the right direction or you're totally off base. So that can be really hard. But I think in terms of the consistency of it that you were asking about, Joe, I mean, for one thing, so Sam had put it on my goals for the year, which we go over right before I get my bonus or not, to launch a podcast. So that was pretty strong incentive. Um, but then other than that, it started to be something that people really did respond to. The good thing about going through the IPP channel is that we have a lot, we publish the podcast and daily dashboard, and that's a huge subscription list. And so it reaches a lot of people. And to my surprise, I mean, utter surprise, people started to like sort of latch onto it, and we were watching the listens like grow and grow, and it was getting like 1,500 listens an episode, and then 2,000, and then 3,000 an episode. And it was like, okay, like that's a decent audience for us to reach. And so then
Yeah.
we were able to sell now we have a sponsor that pays us to put on the podcast so that's the other thing, is I'm responsible for the advertisers. So I have to keep up. Um, but it's been
It's a
fun.
good
It's a
problem
way
to have,
for
though, frankly.
Right. But it's a way for me it's really helped me understand privacy and data protection a lot better. That direct one-to-one conversation with someone who's doing privacy on the ground has really, I think, helped me. And also it's made me up my game, because now that I know people are listening, I don't want to ask stupid questions. So it's made me have to do a little more homework and make sure that I'm asking things that are nuanced and
So
interesting.
what's your process for putting together an episode? Like, aside from my superb recommendations, how do you go about finding
Well, for
guests?
example, one complaint that I've had is that my podcast tends to be really US centric, which is totally fair. Part of that is because I'm based in the US, and interact with a lot of our US peeps. So also there's a lot going on in the US right now. So so what I'm trying to do is really expand globally. So what I'm trying I what so one thing that I learned is that I thought it was true that this whole like everyone has a story thing, and I think everyone does have a story, but everyone doesn't have an interesting story. So I was trying and it's partly my fault as an interviewer, but I was trying to pick people, and I thought, well, we'll just talk for an hour and something good will come out of it. And I was really having trouble in some episodes that you'll listen to. If you listen to the entire catalog, there are some episodes that just don't get there. And it's like, I realized that
Yeah.
I have to find a little bit of a news hook. I have to do a better job of that. So, for example, in Brazil right now, they're about to update their privacy law, and the update will also reconfigure a bit the way that the data protection authority in that country functions and operates. So, looking ahead to that's supposed to happen in April. So, looking ahead to that, I went to our Latin American managing director, Rosa, and I said, "Hey, let's do a two-part podcast. The first part will be you giving us an overview of privacy in Latin America. The second part is, can you introduce me to someone who speaks, pretty solid English in Brazil and who's really up on this privacy stuff, and we'll do like sort of an overview of what the changes in Brazil mean." So I really lean on people for recommendations, because the other thing that's hard about podcasting is that it's not like doing an interview where you can, as a writer, you can take what they say and make it, and sort of paraphrase for them, and then just punctuate that with some quotes from them to make them, sound a little better. Um, or at least more coherent. Like with a podcast, like if you don't know them ahead of time, you're just throwing a dart hoping it works. So what I've definitely started doing is I always do a pre-call before I record now, to
Hmm.
figure out if this person's a good fit. Sometimes they're not, and I have to bail on it, which is
How do
awkward.
you bail on someone? Like, how do you get to the point where you have a pre-call and then you say, actually, you're just not that interesting?
I'm still working on that, to be honest. It's really gentle. I usually, honestly, like I a little bit, and hopefully no one who I've done this to listens to this, but I sometimes I sometimes have to fib a little bit and be like, "Oh, our editorial calendar has changed. Let's talk again, like in the future. I'll keep your number." Like I just recorded one actually with a couple of people, and it just didn't work, and it just wasn't coherent. There was no chemistry. So I said to them, "I think we should re-record. It's my fault. I didn't like facilitate this well enough." We had a pre-call, and I thought we'd be okay, but we just weren't. And they actually, I think, are mad. They haven't responded to my email. So it is awkward. But like one thing I learned at this podcasting conference I went to in Anaheim was that if you care about your show, you have to be willing to like make those moves, because like if your listeners start to trust you with content and then you deliver them something that's totally bad,
Mm.
they're mad and they could, find another show to listen to in the future, and that's not what you want.
Can we talk a little bit about your journey to the IAPP?
Totally, yeah.
Because
Um,
like you alluded to earlier, and when you got into privacy, you're sort of writing about privacy not from a sort of lawyer or privacy professional perspective at the outset, right?
well, so I always have, since I've been writing about privacy, I've been at the IBP and I'm supposed to be writing to privacy lawyers. And not, I shouldn't say that. I'm supposed to be writing to privacy practitioners. That's a very important distinction.
Yes.
Um, but I was coming from, so I was the editor of my college newspaper. I did internships at a bunch of I did an internship at this like alternative news weekly in Portland, Maine, where I went to college and where I'm from. And I was working in community I was working for a newspaper that my responsibility was, my beat was these three municipalities, the cities of Saco and Biddeford and the town of Old Orchard Beach in southern Maine. So I was doing reporting that was like really easy to identify who my readers were. It was like, okay, I know that I should write about the school board budget meeting because the people reading my paper have kids in the schools. Or I know I should write about the bus driver who was drunk driving the kids, which happened, because again, people care about their children or whatever. Town ordinances, things that would affect the budget, trash pickup, what have you. And it was fun. It was like really easy to like sort of connect with the readers, and I sort of understood what I was supposed to do. I got laid off from that job 4 months in because newspapers are dying and shrinking. And same thing happened to this newspaper. And
Oh,
my dad had actually
sorry.
told me, like, when I was going to go into journalism, he's like, that's a bad idea. Like, the closer to the money you are, the more money you're going to make. And newspapers aren't where the money are. And I was like, you don't know my dreams, Dad. And um, now I'm like, that was so stupid. I totally should have listened to him because it's really hard to make money as a writer. So anyway, I called Sam Feifel, who I just mentioned was my boss most recently, crying, who at that time was not working at the IPP but was playing soccer with the CEO of the IPP, Trevor Hughes, and was
Hmm.
like, hold on, I know this guy and he's hiring. He wants to start up like a news team at his organization. So what was hard, like I mentioned, was that when I got there, I was writing about privacy like I was writing it for consumers. So I like was right, I would pick out like parts of the news that I thought were relevant. And my editor at the time was like, no, like our people don't care about this. So I had to like really shift my thinking and start to understand like what my job was, which was to help privacy people do their jobs better. But it's hard to do that if you don't know what their jobs are. So yeah, it took me a long time to figure that out. And going to conferences and the more contacts I made and the more coffees I have, it's still a learning process for me. But the more contact you have with the people who are doing it, the better off you are. So that's sort of been part of the journey.
All right, Angelique. So, I mean, you've had to sort of reshift your mindset to like understand what privacy practitioners want. But I guess your entire life is not privacy, as you often remind me. So to sort of bring this to the close, when you aren't busy trying to understand federal privacy legislation and all sorts of privacy acronyms, what are you doing for fun? What are you reading? Anything interesting?
Hey, I thought you weren't going to ask me the "What are you reading?" question.
It's an open to ask you whatever, for you to say whatever you want to work on.
Oh, well now, but then it looks like I'm just like ignorant and don't read, and so I'm going to avoid that question. No, I'll answer it like that, so cut that part. But um,
I think we should leave that part
I
you know
have
in.
what?
all the
Actually,
power
I
here.
don't care. You can leave that in. I'm reading a totally like it's like an easy beach read. Like sometimes I just read to fall asleep, and so I need something that I don't have to think about. So I'm reading this book called Everything I Never Told You. I don't know how to pronounce the author's last name, so I'm not going to, but that's the name of the book. And for fun, I'm just like trying to, now that I have a bit of an affection for DC, I'm trying to explore. I went for a walk through this neighborhood the other day with my friend called Mount Pleasant, that's like adjacent to my neighborhood of Columbia Heights. And we just like stopped in every random place we could find. And we found this like little tiny cinema. Joe, do you know this place is called like Sun Cinema on like,
Oh yeah, it's good
yeah, it's like
times.
this little tiny cinema with like a popcorn machine and a bartender, and then just like a random assortment of like chairs that
Not,
they found outside.
not to give away too much PII, but that's relatively close to where I think you
Whoa,
live.
cutting
So
that. Definitely
Yeah,
don't
Joe's
want
like, if
anyone
you don't
doxxed on this show.
murder her. Um,
oh no, I'm just
I was reading a
took you
doxing thread
how many
earlier, so
years to find a movie theater that's
Well, no,
right
it looks
across
so sketchy
across
though.
the
It looks
block?
like I thought it was like a porn like type of theater like for a long time because it looked so shady to me. Like there's no like, you know, there's no like marquee outside or like even a list. There's like a tiny like 10-point font list of the movies they're playing tacked onto their wall. But anyway, my point is that I'm exploring DC and all that it has to offer now that I'm sort of feeling more affectionate towards it. And yeah, that's how I'm like kind of spending my time and burning some calories at the same time.
As one final wrap up question, we like to ask our guests what sort of advice they would have for maybe younger them or all the early career professionals trying to take their job in a few years. And so I know that like so many of our guests have, you know, similar stories along the lines of, you know, that I was working with someone or I knew someone that could connect me to someone. And frequently the lesson there is to foster as many, you know, good connections with smart people as you can, because you never know when opportunities will avail themselves to you. But I'd love to hear if you have any other closing advice for any of our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like, you know, it's hard not to be redundant because I think it really is all about connections, but not so much in the way that you might think in terms of like greasing palms. It's just that like people are your greatest asset in terms of building your knowledge base. And I would add on to that that I've really had to just sort of humble myself and decide that even though I'm telling you guys not to put in things that make me sound stupid, like decide that in these one-on-one conversations where I'm not being recorded, that I'm not afraid to sound stupid and I'm not afraid to say, I don't understand what you mean. I need you to back that down. Like walk that back for me. Tell me that at an eighth grade level. Because, you know, there's sort of this like pride thing where we feel like, oh, I've done, you know, X number of years in this field, or like I went to college, I should know that. But like that's where I think we do a disservice to ourselves. So I just think being sort of unafraid and unapologetic to ask what you don't know and ask people to slow down and explain it to you goes a really long way.
Wow, that's really great advice. Angelique, thank you so much for joining us today. I had a really great time talking.
Thanks for having me. I'll be back anytime.
This has been an episode of Tech Policy Grind, a podcast from the Internet Law and Policy Foundry. We're a collection of early career professionals paving the way in the tech policy world, and we really hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what you just heard, it would be a huge help and mean a lot to us if you could head over to iTunes and leave a rating and a review. If you don't have iTunes, maybe just share the show with a friend. We want to thank Ali Sternberg for producing the intro and outro music for the show, and thank you all for listening. So, until next time, thanks.